With Jerry saying good morning. That requires a response now. Good morning. It is a day of rejoicing, not only because our gospel meeting is starting, but I can see things are changing for the better. Buddy Gray has got a purple and gold shirt on, and I can tell he's coming from the darkness into the light. And we're in for a treat with our gospel meeting as well. I'm not going to give the, formal, if we can say such here, introduction of Adam until the pulpit, but Adam and I have a lot of common interests. We preached at the same place. I didn't realize that in Arcadia, Louisiana. And his dad, his uncle, and my dad were actually ministers together in Bastrop, Louisiana. So look forward to hearing him. He will be speaking on adding on this morning in our Bible class. And when he gets up there, if you notice his tie, you can tell he is a man of deep intelligence. So without further ado, we got Adam Miller.
Mark is setting me up to get stoned already this morning. How are you? Everyone's doing well. I left on time and arrived here a little early, so that's always good. As a preacher, one of the things I've had recurring dreams about in the past is miscalculating time and showing up late, or getting there and leaving your Bible in the office. The only thing I forgot this morning was my sunglasses, so we're in good shape. I can manage with that. It is loud. It is good to be here this morning, and I do appreciate so much the invitation to be with you. Mark did make a couple of observations. One, I am wearing an LSU tie this morning, and I hope you will bear with me in that. Confession, until I moved to Saltillo, where I am now, I don't think one stitch of LSU paraphernalia. Now we have purple and gold all over our house, and so the Mississippians have forced it on us, and so it's your own fault. But it is good to be here this morning, and one thing you'll notice as we go through our lessons this week, if you haven't already looked at the flyer, is that all of our lessons are going to sort of have a theme behind them of the house that God built. Now, this is right in my wheelhouse because for longer than I want to admit, I was thinking when Mark asked me to write up that little bio, and I had to write, I've been preaching 14 years. That really hurt my feelings. But I've been building houses and working in construction off and on for somewhere around 16 years now, ever since I was in high school. And not doing a whole lot of it anymore, just doing a few odd and end things. But up until a couple of years ago, I was still building several houses a year with some good friends and working outside of the church. And so construction is something that is very near to me and something I'm well acquainted with. And so if you're tired of building metaphors by the end of the week, just blame me or whoever set up the theme. But we're going to talk about building a house the way God would have it built. And this theme is going to go in several different ways. And maybe this isn't the way that we might expect to begin talking about by adding on, but this morning in our Bible class, it's probably the best time to talk about adding on to God's house. And as we're going to see later on in our morning sermon, it's no secret, in 1 Timothy 3 and verse 15, God tells Timothy through Paul that if he is delayed, he writes, so that he would know how to conduct himself in the church of God, which is the house of God, the pillar and ground of the truth. And we know that God's house is the church. And so when we talk about adding on this morning, what we're talking about, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you, you're going to hear a preacher cuss this morning. You ever heard a preacher cuss before? A couple of years ago, I was shooting a nail into a wall and actually shooting some blocks, and what some people call fire blocks and what Northeast Mississippians call belts in a wall. I've had to learn a whole new construction vernacular everywhere I go. But anyway, shooting some fire blocking in the wall, and the gun bounced, shot a 3-inch framing nail right into the edge of my thumb from about a foot away and buried up about a good half-inch deep. And it was sticking out, and I was walking around like that. And the guy working with me, he said, well, you didn't cuss, and if that won't make a preacher cuss, I don't know what will. So I haven't yet learned what will. But this morning I'm going to start off by saying a dirty word: evangelism. Evangelism. I don't know why when we bring up or mention the word evangelism, but there are many of us who immediately throw up walls. You may be sitting in this class this morning, and when I talk about evangelism, you say, well, this doesn't apply to me. Doesn't have to do with me. That's somebody else's job. That's someone else's responsibility. Or here's this preacher who's going to do the same old thing I've been hearing for 50 or 30 or 40 years. He's going to tell me I need to be out doing evangelism and I'm just not going to do it, or I haven't ever done it. Or you may say that I get feelings of guilt because I know I ought to, but I never have. And I understand it. And so for some reason, evangelism has become a dirty word. When I'm in a business meeting with our elders and deacons and we talk about things like we want to put a new sign up, or we want to freshen up the paint. It looks nice in here, by the way. It's been 7 years since I've been here. It looks great in here. We talk about doing something like this. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of dialogue. If I mention what can we do this spring as an evangelistic effort here in the church, and the crickets start chirping. And I don't know why that is, and it's so unfortunate. I think part of it is that we have been conditioned, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later in our lesson, and actually last week I preached an entire sermon on this, but we have become a church in many ways who has become a consumer-minded church. That is, we seek many times to provide a product that our culture wants to consume, and we try to bring them in by being happy with the sermon they hear and liking the music that they hear, the songs they sing, and they're very comfortable here. In fact, I know, and I brought up my introduction to my lesson last week was this: how many of you ladies in the building would like it if we got a Target in Tupelo and every one of them broke their arm throwing it up in the air? And you know, for a man, Target isn't as good as Walmart because they don't have near the fishing stuff, they don't have near the hunting stuff, they don't have near the tools. I mean, you know, Target's just sort of like a woman's store. Well, why? Because of all of the decor around and all of the home furnishings and all of the clothes and different things that ladies, the knickknacks and stuff that guys don't really care about. But that's what women like about that store. And what we've done so many times is we find ourselves becoming a people who want to cater to the consumer nature of people. We want to fill their needs. And so we talked about that some last week, and we're going to talk about it some a little bit later this morning. But let me start by telling you a little story. One time there was a man who wanted to take up a hobby. His wife told him, "You need a hobby. You're getting grouchy. Get out and do something." And so he thought about what he'd want to do. He said, "Golf. Well, no, it's too hot in the summer and too cold in the winter, and I don't want to sweat. I want something that's a little more laid back." And he thought about hunting, but he didn't really like the idea of killing anything, and they didn't really eat any wild game. And so he said, "I'll take up fishing. I like to eat fish, and it's relaxing. I can get in the shade. In the summer, in the winter, I can put on my coveralls, warm up." So this man, he went down to the local Bass Pro Shops, went in, bought him a brand new Bass Tracker boat, hooked it to the back of his truck. He went in, he bought all the new tackle. He subscribed to different fishing magazines, different ideas here, and learning about crappie fishing and catfishing and bass fishing. He began to consume all that he could, and every time a new bait would come out, he'd order it, and he began watching bass fishing television shows, and he learned about how to fish and how to present and how to do this. He even found local seminars at local places where fishermen were coming in and teaching people how to fish and how to do this and how to do that. He got friends that were fishermen. He started talking to them about, well, how do you fish and what do you think about fishing? And in fact, this man within a year's time had acquired something that many of us would be envious of, especially Mark, since yours is now gone. And I'll remember that when I come back tomorrow. I may bring you something. But you know, can you imagine having just an absolute garage full of fishing tackle? This man did. Brand new boat. The problem was, at the end of the year's time, the boat had never gotten wet and the fish had never been caught because the man spent so much time talking about how to fish and learning how to fish and buying the stuff to fish and going to seminars talking about fishing and honing his skills as a fisherman that he never went out and fished. I want to submit to you this morning this, brothers and sisters. It is better for us to get out and go fishing, even if we're not completely skilled, even if we're not completely stocked or prepared, than it is to talk about it, to study about it, to think about it, to pray about it, and never go fishing. In the book of Matthew chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, that familiar story where Jesus comes to the Apostle Peter, or the soon-to-be Apostle Peter, and tells Peter and Andrew there, "Come, and I will make you what? Fishers of men." Jesus' purpose in coming to the world was to seek and to save that which is lost, Luke 19:10. And what falls on us today is the task of evangelism. It's not a dirty word, folks. The word evangelism comes from a Greek word which, properly broken down, literally means a good message. In fact, the word that we would translate the word angel from is in the word evangelism. Did you realize that? A messenger, a one who is a good messenger, an evangelist, one who brings good news. And so that's all we're doing. We're just telling someone good news. Isn't it amazing today that in all of our pockets, how many of you have one of these in your pocket this morning, an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy, some sort of a smartphone? Many of you are on Facebook, and it's amazing. Anytime we do anything these days, my kids scored a run in the baseball game. We caught this fish at the lake. We're sharing it on Facebook. We send pictures to our parents. My dad sent me a picture via text message the other day, and I almost fell on my face. Because my dad's never been in the smartphone. In fact, my dad, up until very recently, had an old flip phone that didn't even have a real screen on it or anything. I mean, Dad was still living, and I got a picture message from my dad, and I thought, who has kidnapped my dad, and what did you do with him? We're all in the age, and today we want to share everything. We're in the social world. We tweet, we Facebook, we put everything out there. Do you realize that all evangelism is sharing what we have in Jesus Christ with the world? That's all it is. It doesn't require a special boat. It doesn't require a special skill set. It doesn't require a special set of tackle. All it requires is the desire to tell others what we already know. Many times what we find is, and we're going to get into this in just a moment, but so many times what we find is that people, well, the reasons we don't do it, well, I just don't know enough. Well, what if they ask me a question and I'm not prepared to answer it, then what? Well, what if I'm in a Bible study, or what if I'm talking to my friends and they ask me something I don't know, and then I'll be embarrassed, or we're really good friends and I don't want to mess up that relationship. Well, I've got to work with this person for the next 20 years, and I don't want to cause friction in the workplace by bringing up the gospel. You see, these are real concerns, and let me just share something with you this morning from a minister's perspective. Those are real concerns for me too. In fact, at the church where I preach today, I can't lie to you and say, we're setting the world on fire and come do what we're doing. Because, yes, we baptize a few people every year, but it's not because we're getting out and beating the bushes and setting up studies every week. It's just simply sometimes the way things work out. And I'm afraid the great apostasy of our day in the church is not some of the things we worry about so often, but the great apostasy in our day in the church is our unwillingness to tell people that Jesus Christ is our Lord. And that's something this morning I hope that we can discuss in the next 20 minutes or so. 3 things that evangelism requires this morning. I realize that Bible class is a condensed period, so hopefully in the next few minutes we'll go through these quickly. If you need scripture references, if I go too quickly, then I promise I will get them back to you. Number 1, evangelism requires a right attitude. A right attitude. Number 1, evangelism cannot be done out of necessity. How many times have we heard a preacher say we need to be teaching our neighbors, we need to be sharing the gospel, we need to be doing this, and we felt that guilt trip well up within us? I need to do more. Listen to what Paul tells the church in Corinth in 2 Corinthians 9 and verse 6. You may say, what in the world does this have to do with anything? Well, just listen. But this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, Paul says to the church in Corinth. And he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. So let each one give as he purposes in his heart, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. And God is able to make all grace abound towards you, and you always having all sufficiency in all things may have an abundance for every good work. Now, obviously, we commonly quote these verses with reference to what? The offering on the Lord's Day. But if evangelism is simply giving someone the message that I have, then is not evangelism in itself a form of giving? And would it not by extension serve to reason that if I am to give, not grudgingly or out of necessity to the offering plate because the preacher said so and I don't want to go to hell, then in the same way I need to in my mind not think of evangelism as a laborious task or something that I've got to do so I can make it to heaven, but something that I'm privileged to do as a child of God. I am privileged to be God's messenger. He's chosen me, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. In John chapter 14 and verse 15, John would tell us the words of Jesus where Jesus says, if you love me, what? Keep my commandments. We understand that doing the will of God is not some harsh requirement. God has not asked us to do something out of some slavery or some laborious duty, but God has called us out of love to serve. And so evangelism requires my attitude to be right and not thinking, well, this is something I've got to do because the preacher said so, and if I don't do it, he's going to keep harping on it. 1 John chapter 5, verses 2 and following, John says, by this we know that we love the children of God when we love God and keep His commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep His commandments, and His commandments are not burdensome. For whatever is born of God overcomes the world, and this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Not out of necessity. If this morning you come to this class and you say, here's this preacher preaching on evangelism again, and he's going to tell me what I need to do and what I have to do, just drop it. You don't have to. And if you feel like you have to evangelize somebody, if you feel like that's just what you've got to do so you can go to heaven, just drop that attitude. I hope by the end of this class you can have a new and fresh perspective on evangelism and come to it not with the attitude of it's something I need to do to check a list, but it's something I'm privileged to do as a child of God. Number 2, in my right attitude, I can't focus on the past. Now this is success or failure. Occasionally I've brought up the idea, not just where I'm at now, but in every church I've ever worked in. I've brought up the idea, well, why don't we go and try this, or try knocking doors, or try mailing out things, or try doing this, or try doing that. And here's what I'll hear inevitably every time. Well, we've done that before. We've done that before. Okay, when did we do that? Well, back in 1984. We had some students from the School of Preaching come down and we knocked every door in town. And I just want to say, brother, do you realize how many of those doors you knocked, people have moved out and others have moved in? Do you realize how many children, and myself, I was born in 81, I was 3. So people my age, they didn't know you were knocking on their door. When you start thinking about things like that, oftentimes we get in our minds that we've tried it before and it didn't work, and so I'm just going to quit. We've got to forget those things that are behind, whether they are successes or failures. In Philippians chapter 3, verses 7 and following, Paul talks about his prior life as a Pharisee, as a Jew, and he talks about how that he had counted all things for loss for the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And we have this very popular verse here that we quote over and over and over again in verses 12 through 14, but I want you to listen to it in a new way this morning. Paul says, not that I've already attained or I'm already perfected, Philippians 3:12, but I press on that I may lay hold of that for which Christ Jesus has also laid hold of me. Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended, but one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forward to those things which are ahead, I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. Now, normally when I've heard preachers quote this verse, it goes something like this. I've made mistakes in my life, and Paul said, forget the mistakes in the past and press forward to those future successes, right? What if you say, Adam, we've done evangelism, and look, we've got these members here. We baptized these people from these campaigns. Don't sit here and tell us we're not doing our job. Look at that. Well, let me just stop and let you see what Paul's really saying. Paul is not talking about only the failures of his past. In fact, look at verse 12 again. Paul says, not that I've already attained or am already perfected, but I press on. Paul says, I gave up Judaism. I gave up my family. Gave up my career, gave up my education, gave up my lifestyle, gave up my affluency. I gave up my privilege and prestige. I gave it all up, but that's still not enough. I'm forgetting what I've already done and acting like I've not succeeded in one thing. And so what Paul is really saying here is this. Not only am I forgetting my past failures, but Paul says I'm not going to rest on the laurels of my small success in the past. If you say, Adam, we just did a big evangelism push in the fall, 6 souls were baptized, praise be to God for that, if that happened. Good. Now forget what you've done and get to work again. Paul says it should never be enough. It should never be enough. There's never a time in the Christian's life when we should be satisfied with the status quo unless the church is literally turning the world upside down. And even when it was, Paul said that's not enough. I want more. I think, brothers and sisters, we have settled for far too little in the religious world. We have settled with keeping the building painted and keeping the numbers on the scoreboard about the same. We've settled with saying, well, people just aren't interested anymore. We've settled far too many times and established in our minds that no one cares and no one wants to listen, and our attitude has caused us many times to become idle, and I am the chief among them. I'm the chief among them. Story was told of 2 frogs that were hopping down a path in the woods. I don't know if you like frog stories, but you're going to get one this morning. And they came to a place in the road where another trail converged with theirs, and a little frog came hopping along, and they said, "Hey, how are you doing?" Well, he just kept hopping. He didn't even talk. And so they said, "Well, we'll hop with him anyway," even though he's not very friendly. And while they were hopping, it wasn't very long, and there was a hole in the road, and this other frog that they just met, that even it was just unfriendly frog, he fell in the hole. And they went up to the edge, and they looked down, and they saw the frog in the bottom of the hole, and he looked up at them, and he began to hop. He didn't even make it halfway to the top. And they said, "Serves you right, you unfriendly dude. You're going to die in that hole. That's what you get for being unfriendly." The frog didn't say a word. He just sat there and looked at him. He jumped again. They said, "We're telling you, you're going to die. You're just going to die tired if you keep jumping. You might as well just lay there and accept your fate." He jumped again. Now they begin to scream and they begin to plead with this frog in the bottom of the hole. "Stop, you idiot. Stop, you idiot. What are you doing?" And they just taunted him on and on. By the end, they were so cruel to the frog in the bottom of the hole that it would have made most people just lay down and die. But this frog kept jumping, and finally he mustered all of his strength and made one final jump and made it out of the hole. And he said, "Guys, thank you so much. You see, I'm deaf. And I don't know what you were telling me, but I could see how well you were cheering me on. And I could see the urgency in your faces and the urgency in your gestures, and you inspired me to do more." This morning, I want us to not focus on not making it out of the hole in the past. How many times in our lives does fear of failure keep us from succeeding in the present? This isn't just an evangelism. This is in every aspect of our lives. Do you realize the most common command in the Bible from Genesis to the end of Revelation is to not be afraid in some form or another? Did y'all realize that? The most common thing that God says to His people is, "Do not fear." We all know the Revelation 21:8 song, right? "Liars go to hell." Go read Revelation 21:8 and look at the first category of people who are going to have their part in the lake of fire. "But the cowardly." I think sometimes just to call, and here's the beautiful thing about wearing an LSU tie in the Delta and you're not hired on by if y'all fire me, that's okay. I'll just go home. I'm not the local guy. I don't have to put up with you. But I think sometimes my congregation, myself, and maybe many congregations across the Lord's church, we're just afraid. I think that's just it. We're just afraid. And God says, "Don't be afraid. I'm with you." So let's move on. Finally, I need to have the right attitude that it's my job to tell people, not to convert them. Now, I'm not going to get to my other 2 points if I go into all this, but I would have you study this morning Ezekiel 33, 1 through 7. You're probably familiar with those passages, but God comes to Ezekiel and He says, "I've set you as a watchman over the people." And here's what He says. He says, if you go and tell the people that danger is coming, and they don't listen, their blood's on their head. But if there's danger coming, and you don't tell the people, then their blood's on your head. Now, I believe that principle is still true today. God, and here's something we need to remember, God has not sent us to baptize people. Paul even said that. Have you ever read 1 Corinthians chapter 1? God didn't send me to baptize, but to preach. Our job and what we're asking is not that we make the scoreboard swell or the numbers swell. We're not asking that we fill the baptistry with people. What God calls us to do is to simply tell people why I'm a Christian. That's it. And why my life's so full of joy. And why my life's so full of hope. And what makes me and my life different. It's not because of anything I'm doing. It's not because of some success I have. It's because of what God is doing in me. And God is calling me to tell people, not to convert them. I think that takes a little bit of the pressure off. Sometimes, I think we are afraid to evangelize because in the past we've tried and failed and we feel like that's a failure. Friend, let me share something with you this morning. Every time you share the good news with anyone in any form, it is a success. Success is in our job to share. It is God who gives the increase, 1 Corinthians 3. And so let's not forget that right attitude. Number 2, a right heart. I'm going to have to move kind of quickly. In Matthew 22, 34 and following, Jesus is asked, what's the greatest commandment? He says, the greatest commandment is what? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. The second is not far from it. Love your neighbors yourself. Evangelism must be rooted in love. Must be rooted in love. Do you love the world around you? Before you say, yes, I love everybody. I mean, my son Joshua, he's not here with me this morning, but my youngest son Joshua, I've been playing this game with him for years and years and years and years, and sometimes they'll play back. Caleb used to play, but now Caleb's too old to talk about love with Daddy. He's just turned 11. Josh still will for a little bit longer. And so Josh will sit in my lap at night and right before bed, and I'll say, Josh, who do you love most in the whole wide world? Who do you love the most? And I'll hug him and I'll really butter him up, and he'll say, everybody. He'll say, and here's what his answer has been the last couple of years. He'll say, God and Jesus, then everybody else. And I say, not Daddy, God and Jesus and everybody. I love everybody the same. And I told him, I said, son, you're going to make some kind of a fine senator or something one day because you're a wonderful politician. Wonderful politician. He is politically correct if anyone ever has been. Josh doesn't want to offend anybody. I love everybody the same. Do we really love everybody in the whole wide world? Think about, do I love my neighbor as I love myself? This is difficult for me, and I almost didn't even bring it up. I'm going to because I think it drives home and illustrates the point. Last Sunday night, I got a call after evening services from one of our members who called and said that there was a lady that we knew that had heart surgery. Wednesday night. And she had heart surgery on Monday, and everything had gone well with the heart surgery, and she was in ICU, but she didn't wake up on Thursday, and she didn't wake up on Friday morning. And so what they did is they went and ran a CAT scan, and they discovered that during her surgery she had a massive stroke and would render her completely brain dead. They unhooked her from the ventilator on Friday morning, and I went and sat with her husband for a few hours while he told her goodbye. Now, as of now, she's still living, but she's not going to be here very long. It's just a matter of time until she'll either starve to death or her kidneys will shut down and she'll leave this earth. Now, here's why I tell you this story. Because about 3 weeks ago, her brother called me from Texas and said, my sister has got to have major surgery in the next few weeks, and there's a good chance she may not live through it, and she's not a Christian. Will you go see her? Yeah, I will, no problem. Let me get her name. Wrote it down, put it in my stack of stuff to do. And I let it go a day or two. And I finally called her up, went and saw her, set up a study together, and she wanted to obey the gospel. How great is that? She attended services the next Sunday morning and night, ate supper with us at the fellowship meal. How great was that? And she said, well, I've got a doctor's appointment tomorrow, and when I get back from the appointment, let's have one final study, and then I'm ready to become a Christian. She went to the doctor's appointment and she got deathly ill, had to go home, was bedbound, and guess what? She never got a chance to go to the church building. She never obeyed the gospel. And there's nothing that I've ever experienced that hurt as bad as that. When I got that phone call last Wednesday night saying that they're going to have to unhook her from the ventilator and she's not coming home. I wonder if I'd have gone a day earlier or 2 days earlier or 3 days earlier. I wonder what would have happened. Now we can second guess ourselves. At the end of the day, we're still just the watchmen. But brothers and sisters, if we don't love the people around us enough to put them ahead of our own stupid schedules and our own stupid wants and our own stupid things that mean nothing at the end of the day, then we've lost the point of being a Christian. We've got to learn to love, and love is not a feeling. Jesus didn't say, feel good about everybody else in the world. What love is, and you go through 1 Corinthians 13 and you outline what love is. Love is what? It's selfless. Love is not arrogant. Love does not seek its own. Love is kind. And when you look at all the characteristics in love in 1 Corinthians 13, what you're going to learn about love is that love is not a simple feeling, but love is found in actions. And so evangelism is rooted in love. And I want to ask you this question. Do you really love the people around you, even if their skin isn't the same color, even if they don't live in the same size house, even if they don't drive a car that's as nice as yours, even if they don't speak the same language as you do, even if they don't think about the same things and they don't share in the same things, even if they're involved in some bad or dirty habits? Why don't we love like we should? I think this is a heart problem and we need to think about it. Boy, I'd love to spend more time on that, but we're out of time. Evangelism is sharing what I've received. 1 John chapter 3, verses 16 and 17 and 18, John reminds us that if we have this world's goods and we don't share or give to those in need, how does the love of God abide in us? Yes, sir. Oh, okay. So 10:15, right? Oh, we're going to 20 after. All right. I still got a long way to go, though. The gospel, in some ways and shape, is something that belongs to me. It's a good that I have, and it's something I can share with my neighbors. I need to have the right heart that I want to give them what I have. I'm reminded in Acts chapter 3 and verse 6 when Peter and John come through the gate there and they find that lame man and he's begging for alms. They say, silver and gold we do not have, but what we do have, or what I do have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ, rise up and walk. And they shared with him not gold and silver, but they shared with him the good news of Christ. And friends, we need to learn to be a people who share. Remember the story in 2 Kings 7 where the Syrian army had come and raided the northern kingdom, and they're outside the gates of Samaria, and those 4 lepers are sitting there, and if we sit here, we're going to die. If we go in the city, we're going to die. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to the army of the Syrians, and we'll turn ourselves in. If they kill us, we're going to be dead anyway. But if not, maybe they'll take us in and feed us. When they get there, the armies are gone. God had caused them to flee during the night, and they're running around. Can you see those men running around, those lepers running around, just taking gold and throwing it in the air and just filling themselves up on bread and meat and everything they want? And finally they stop and they say, this is not right. Today is a day of good news. And essentially they say we've got to share it with those in the city. How selfish are we to take the immeasurable grace of God and keep it to ourselves? The idea, have you ever talked to people outside of the church, or even, how about in the church, that are hurting? Do you know how many of our friends and neighbors, have you ever talked to your single neighbors that have gone through a divorce? Have you ever talked to your neighbors who've lost children, who've lost parents recently, who've lost a job, who are suffering with income? Have you ever talked to any of these people and found out how much they're hurting? Friends, I'm here to tell you the gospel changes lives. And it's far superior and far grander than those lepers finding that empty camp full of gold and silver and food. When we share the gospel with someone, we give them balm for the soul, and we give them something that heals broken hearts, and nothing else will. You brought up Roy Dean Sisson this morning. A friend of ours from Louisiana, he was talking about welding one time. And somebody said, can you weld? And he said, I can weld anything but the crack of dawn and a broken heart. That's pretty good. I'm not that good. That's pretty good, folks. You know, God heals the broken heart. The gospel heals the broken soul. And I think when we learn to look at people as broken and hurting individuals and not as somebody that should have known better, we'll learn to love, and then we'll learn to share what can help make them into something far better. But it takes some work. Evangelism is honoring the golden rule. Jesus said what? If you want other people to do this to you, do it to them. Well, if you were lost this morning, would you want me to come to you and spend some of my time to talk to you about your soul? If the answer is yes, then friends, there are people in this neighborhood, in this community, who want you to take time out of your life to talk to them about their soul. Sometimes we think, oh, I'll sound silly. Oh, they'll think I'm just being an old fuddy-duddy or a religious nut. Let me ask you a question. Do you think you're a religious nut or a fuddy-duddy for thinking about your own soul? They won't either. I think sometimes some of our fears are unwarranted, they're unnecessary. Finally, evangelism is saving someone from harm. James talks about in James 5:19 and 20 about when one turns a sinner from his ways, that he saves a soul from death. We need to understand that when I teach someone the gospel, I am helping them out of the fire. Finally, this morning, we need the right attitude, we need the right heart, and we need the right approach. We need the right approach. I think, and I meant to spend most of my time here because I think you've probably heard points 1 and 2 a whole lot, and that's that thing that can lead to guilt trip and that feeling of necessity that I was talking about. I think a lot of our members, and I think this is something I want to encourage the elders here and the preacher here, I want us to start thinking more about how to do this instead of just that we should be doing this. Does that make sense? You know, if someone, let's just use welding as an example. If there was a broken piece of metal at my house or something that needed to be welded together, and I got my oldest son, Caleb, he's 11, and I said, Caleb, weld that together. You need to weld that. By the end of the day, when I get home at 3:30, if that isn't welded together, you're going to be grounded for a month. He said, Dad, I know I need to do it, but how do I do it? Son, you just figure it out. There's an instruction book in there by the welder. You go read, get on the internet, whatever you need to do, you figure it out. You see, when I was about 11, my dad took me up to the barn and he taught me how to weld. Put his hands on mine and he guided me. And I would like to see our shepherds and our ministers spend a little more time in evangelism with the common member. And let me encourage you as the common member to step out and tell your shepherds and your minister, hey, I want to help you make the church grow. Can I go visit with you? You don't know how much that would make my soul just jump through the roof. If members of the church would call me during the week and said, we've got people we need to go see, will you go with me? Amen to that. And so what I want to do in this final part is I want to talk a little bit about our approach, and there's only about 5 minutes, so hang with me here. We'll go as quick as we can. Number one, let's get away from shame and shock. You know, if you don't save your friends, they're going to burn in hell. I don't want to do that. I don't want to shame you into evangelism. I don't want to shock you into evangelism. And on the flip side of that, I don't want to get into this mushy-cushy consumer Christianity that we hit on a little bit earlier, that, well, we need to print up really fancy brochures. And Mark, if you'll start using Prezi, and we'll broadcast that, we'll put that thing up there on the wall. I used Prezi for a little over a year there at Mayfield, and I had fancy presentations, and there was, man, and people, oh, that's so great. But you know what? I'm not using one this morning, and the message is the same. It's window dressing. The people who met in this building prior to the pews and the paint were the same people. Now, I understand Paul said that I've become all things to all men that I might by all means save some, but what we don't need to fall into is a trap of luring people to church. We're not bringing people to church, we're trying to bring them to Christ. And I can make people feel comfortable in an environment. I can make people feel comfortable with the preacher. I can make people be encouraged by the singing. But what I haven't done, maybe I never brought them to Jesus Christ. It's the gospel. And so not misguided approaches. I don't want to do that. I want very quickly, and I hope you're taking notes. I hate that we've got to fly through this, but I want you to observe that Christianity from the very beginning has been a quote-unquote taught religion. Now, Jeremiah 31 through 34, there's a passage of Scripture there. Behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, and I'll make a new covenant with the house of Israel, not the covenant the house of their fathers broke. But at the end of that passage there in Jeremiah 31, without going through all of it, just for time's sake, Jeremiah says this. It's very interesting. He says, no more will everyone teach his neighbor, saying, know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from least of them to the greatest. I had somebody ask me when I was a young preacher way back, what does that mean? Does that mean in the new covenant we're not going to teach anybody anymore? I said, well, maybe it's being fulfilled. Sorry, that's a sarcastic preacher joke about evangelism this morning. Y'all forgive me for that. That was a joke. I wasn't serious about that. What it means is this. In the new covenant, when people are added to the kingdom, they're added because they have already been taught to know the Lord. You see, when I was born a Jew, if I were under the old law, under the old kingdom, when a person became a Jew, they were born a Jew by natural birth. And then Deuteronomy 6, the Shema of Israel, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. And you shall teach these things to your children. The reason the children had to be taught, they didn't come from the womb knowing about God. And so they were born into the kingdom first and had to be taught about the king secondly. Nowadays, we teach people about the king and then they're born into the kingdom. And so Jeremiah says they won't have to ask any more about knowing the Lord. Why? Because they'll already be taught. Christianity is a taught religion. How did you become a Christian? Somebody taught you. Somebody took the time to educate you. Somebody took the time to put you in a pew or in a Bible class and let you learn about Jesus Christ. That's how we all have come to Christ. And so Christianity is a taught religion. And so we find verses like Matthew 28, 18 through 20, Mark 16, 15 and following. And my favorite, and the one we're going to use this morning as we close, is 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2. 2 Timothy 2 and verse 2. Now, if you'll turn here with me, I want you to notice here this progression. Paul tells Timothy, and the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Let me read that again because you may have missed it. And the things that you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. Now, how many progressions are there in that verse? Let's read it together. And the things that you've heard from me, 1, Paul told Timothy. Commit these to faithful men, 2, Timothy to those men who will be able to teach others also. 3 progressions, 4 people involved, 4 sets. Paul to Timothy, Timothy to someone else to someone else. You see, that's how we are here today. Someone taught you, and someone taught them, 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 all the way back to the apostles. As we close this morning, and as we think about this, here's what I want you to do. Number 1, I want you to utilize the tools you have. We've already talked a little bit about take advantage of your elder. Let me encourage you to do this. Put your elders to work. If you're not already, call them up and say, I want to go visiting Tuesday night. What you doing? Good, you're going visiting. Let your shepherd shepherd. And I think all of them would say, I think I can speak for them and say it, fill them with joy. Secondly, we just had a big building cleaning a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things we threw away was 2 of the old Jewel Miller film projectors. We still had those antiques. And some of the people were laughing about, what do we still have these for? And I said, before you laugh, I want you to stop and think about how many people are sitting in our pews because someone took the time to show those films. Today, we have things like this. You know what? This is Searching for Truth. A little deep. You may all be familiar with it. You may all be using it on a regular basis. If you're not, you can acquire these for $1 a piece. World Video Bible School. $1. Take them to work. Give them to your coworkers. You can mail them to people anonymously. You can take them and sit in someone's home. It's got 5 lessons, introduction and 5 lessons on it. And you can sit with someone and teach them the gospel and never say a word. Because this is a wonderful piece of material. Here's something else I've been using lately, and I'm going to tell you something. It's pretty interesting. Now, by the way, a man wrote this book, not God. Man wrote this book. Full disclosure. I don't agree with everything in this book. But this book is called Muscle and a Shovel, and it is Michael Shank's account of how he was converted to Christ from the religious world. He took detailed notes of his conversion. And through that, he has told a story that today serves as a wonderful evangelism tool. I'm having people sign the front of these books as I have them read them, and the list of signatures is growing. I've got 2 or 3 of these out in circulation right now, and I've got some people very near and dear to me reading these right now. Sometimes you may not be able, or you may not have the time to go and sit personally with someone, or you may not feel confident to go and sit personally with someone. But I encourage you to utilize the tools you have. Any comments or questions as we close this morning? I appreciate. Yes, sir.
My cousin by marriage is an elder in Tyler, Texas. His cousin read that book and the next day obeyed the gospel.
Well,
I know it's not the tool.
No, it's not the tool. This is a very powerful tool. I'd encourage you all to at least look at it. It may give you some advice. And let me just say this. As of last count, about a month ago, 6,000 baptisms in the last year from people who've read this book. I don't remember the number on this, but it's well over 6,000. These are tools we have right now that are $15, $1. Something we can all do, something, $1. You go spend that 4 times over buying a coffee this morning. I mean, think about it. I think what we can do is when we have the right attitude, we have the right heart, and when we learn the right approach, I think we can do some good. But it's not going to be easy. Sorry to end on that note. It's not going to be easy. Brother Tom Holland said this year, and I'll close after this. Brother Tom Holland said this year at the lectureship at Freed Hardeman, he said, years ago it was busing and it was film strips. Today it's DVDs and internet. He said, but there's still no easy way to do the Lord's work. There's no easy way to do the Lord's work. Still work. Thank you so much.